Karoline Leavitt destroys Jimmy Kimmel. The studio applause. The studio lights blazed overhead as the applause faded. Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage for the third time, but this time the energy was palpably different. The young conservative firebrand walked with poise, her sharp navy blazer a visual contrast to the relaxed tone of late-night entertainment. Jimmy Kimmel greeted her with his trademark smirk. "Ladies and gentlemen, she's back, Karoline Leavitt, the voice of the future right. Welcome back, Karoline." She smiled politely, nodding to the audience. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Round 3, huh?" The audience laughed, but there was an undercurrent of tension. They all remembered her last appearance where she sparred with Kimmel over government surveillance and media bias. Tonight, she looked ready for another round. Jimmy leaned forward. "So, Karoline, are we talking about policy tonight, or just cancel culture again?" Karoline tilted her head. "You mean the culture where people lose jobs for saying something unpopular 5 years ago? That one?" A few audience members chuckled. Jimmy raised an eyebrow. "You think it's that simple?" She nodded. "Yes. Accountability is not the same as mob justice, but let's get into it." The host smirked, sensing an opportunity to poke. "You know, a lot of people think your generation doesn't understand what responsibility means. And a lot of people think your generation confuses sarcasm with substance." She fired back, her tone cool. The audience gasped, then applauded. Jimmy recovered with a chuckle. All right. Let's take a breath." Karoline leaned forward. "No, let's not. Let's talk about what's really going on in the media. Your media, Jimmy. People like me aren't just criticized. We're vilified. Not because we're dangerous, but because we're different." The crowd grew quiet. Kimmel responded, "People get criticized when they promote bigotry. You've defended some questionable statements, and you've platformed people who openly mock half the country." She shot back. He raised his hands. "I interview people. I ask questions, then ask real ones. Ask why so many Americans feel like they're being talked down to by people in this room." That hit hard. A ripple of unease passed through the studio. Jimmy took a breath. "Karoline, you've said canceling culture is the biggest threat to free speech. But isn't hate speech dangerous too?" Karoline nodded. "Yes. But who defines hate? Twitter mobs, studio executives." Jimmy paused. "Well, we have to start somewhere." "No," she said. "We have to start with principles, with debate, not deplatforming. You claim to believe in dialogue, but your show too often mocks the very idea of differing views." Jimmy's face hardened. "That's not fair." Karoline's tone didn't change. Neither is silencing people before they finish a sentence. The crowd sat in silence. This wasn't an interview anymore, it was a reckoning. And Karoline wasn't backing down. As the applause died down, Karoline Leavitt crossed her legs on the sleek leather chair and gave the camera a practiced razor-sharp smile. This was her third appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live, but she wasn't here to play it safe. Not this time. Jimmy leaned forward, his classic smirk curling. "So, Karoline, I have to ask, you're back again. What's changed since last time? Still swinging hard in Washington?" Karoline chuckled softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You know me, Jimmy. I don't pull punches. Especially when it comes to bureaucratic nonsense." "Right," Jimmy said, sarcasm laced under his tone. "You're the self-declared bulldozer of the swamp." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "Declared by the voters, actually. But sure, Jimmy, call it what you want." The audience gave a mixed reaction, half laughter, half cautious silence. They sensed the tension, that same electric undercurrent from Karoline's last 2 appearances. Something bigger was coming. Jimmy took a sip from his mug and leaned in. "You've been pretty vocal lately about your views on censorship, cancel culture, and what you call elite Hollywood hypocrisy. Should we brace ourselves?" "I mean, if the truth makes people uncomfortable, maybe they should," Karoline replied coolly. He chuckled, but the gleam in his eye was more predator than host. "Truth is such a flexible word these days, huh? Especially when it's coming from someone who works in politics." Karoline gave him a long look. "Says the guy whose job is to sell sarcasm as wisdom every night." Gasps fluttered through the studio. The crowd was awake now. "Whoa," Jimmy said, holding up his hands mockingly. "I'm just the court jester here. You're the one trying to play Joan of Arc." Karoline didn't blink. Joan of Arc stood for something. That's better than pretending to care when it's trending. The energy in the room shifted. The playful banter had cracked. Now it was ideological warfare wrapped in late-night lighting. Jimmy tapped his pen, visibly annoyed. Let's get to it, then. You've made comments about how Hollywood muzzles dissent. You've said this town only celebrates diversity of skin, not of thought. That's a heavy claim. Karoline leaned forward, locking eyes with him. It's not a claim, it's a fact. Try wearing a conservative badge here and see how fast doors slam in your face. Or better yet, try disagreeing with the herd without getting labeled a monster. Jimmy gave a tight laugh. So you're the victim now, a rising star on every major news network, millions of followers, but poor Karoline can't get a table in West Hollywood. The jab landed, but she didn't flinch. Victim, no, but I do know what it feels like to be targeted just for thinking differently. And that's not bravery in your book, is it? It's inconvenient, the audience murmured. Some nodded, others frowned. Jimmy looked unsettled. Okay, but let's be real here, he said, tone sharpening. You know who else said they were just thinking differently, people pushing conspiracy theories? Dangerous ones. Karoline crossed her arms. Don't lump me in with extremists just because I call out your tribe's hypocrisy. I believe in free speech for everyone. That includes you. Even when you mock people like me. Jimmy's grin tightened. I mock hypocrisy, not ideology. Except when your side's doing it. Then it's called progress. Right? The audience was on edge now. Studio cameras zoomed in. The stage had officially transformed from entertainment to battleground. So what's your solution, Karoline? You want to defund Hollywood, take away Netflix from people you don't agree with, she laughed genuinely. No, Jimmy, I want honesty. I want real dialogue. I want people like you to admit that your monologues every night aren't brave, they're safe. They're scripted applause lines for an echo chamber. Jimmy stood up slightly in his seat. And what are you doing right now? This isn't dialogue. You came here to the grandstand to stir the pot. Karoline met his fire with her own. Because someone has to. You've spent years turning politics into punchlines. I'm here to remind people that ideas have consequences. Jimmy shook his head. And what about compassion, responsibility? You say whatever you want, and when people respond, you call it an attack. Karoline's voice lowered. Criticism I can handle. What I won't accept is the idea that some voices deserve to be silenced because they make people uncomfortable. That's not compassion. That's cowardice. A hush fell. Even the band in the corner sat still. Jimmy looked directly at her. So you think there should be no consequences for what people say, even if it spreads hate? No. I think we need to distinguish between hate and dissent, between free speech and dangerous rhetoric. But that requires nuance, Jimmy, and frankly, I don't think your format's built for it. The crowd laughed nervously. Some clapped. Some didn't know what to do. Jimmy fired back, tone heated. Well, you're on my stage now, so let's see some nuance, shall we? Karoline smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Great. Then here's some cancel culture doesn't make us better. It makes us scared. When we destroy people for their past instead of challenging their ideas in the present, we become weaker, not stronger. Jimmy snapped back. You keep calling it cancel culture, but maybe it's accountability. And who decides that, the mob Twitter? Some board editor in New York. Jimmy stood up now. Or maybe people like me, who've had enough of watching bigotry parade around under the flag of just asking questions. Karoline stood too. The tension reached a breaking point. You don't want dialogue, Jimmy. You want dominance. You want to be the only one allowed to ask questions and silence anyone who answers differently. He stepped from behind his desk. I want people to stop hiding behind ideology to justify hurting others. She matched his pace. And I want people to stop pretending that protecting feelings is more important than protecting truth. The audience was dead silent now. No music, no laughs, just the raw weight of a cultural divide laid bare on national television. Karoline leaned in slightly, her tone cold and clear. You're not afraid of hate, Jimmy. You're afraid of losing control. Jimmy's mouth opened to reply, but the band leader cut in. We've got to go to a commercial. The lights dimmed, but no one moved. Karoline turned toward the audience with a final glance. Thanks for listening. If we can't talk here, where can we... She walked off the stage without waiting for a response. Jimmy stood frozen. It was the first time in a long time he didn't have a punchline. The studio was no longer a stage. It was a pressure cooker. The heat of clashing ideologies amplified by years of division was about to boil over. Jimmy sat down slowly, trying to reclaim control. You want people to talk. Let's talk about January 6th. You called the people arrested that day disillusioned. Want to clarify that Karoline didn't flinch? Yes. Disillusioned by a system that repeatedly told them they didn't matter. That doesn't mean I support violence, but ignoring the why won't stop the next crisis. So you're justifying it, Jimmy snapped. I'm explaining it, she said. You can't solve a problem you refuse to understand. A smattering of applause came from the audience, half-hearted, unsure. Jimmy leaned in. You know what bothers me, this faux intellectual routine. You dress it up as discourse, but it's really just grievance in heels. Karoline's smile was ice. And yours is what righteousness in a suit, laughter, nervous and immediate rippled through the audience. Jimmy's face darkened. I don't claim to be perfect, he said. But I'm not on cable news every night, rallying culture war troops either. No, Karoline said, her voice low, you just roast the ones who do. Jimmy shifted in his chair. Let's talk about your voting record. You've opposed several federal diversity initiatives. Why? Because real equality comes from merit, not quotas, she shot back. You don't fix injustice by flipping the hierarchy. You fix it by dismantling it. Easy to say from your position, Jimmy said. Funny, Karoline countered. That's exactly what people say about you. A murmur passed through the crowd again. The audience sensed something seismic. This wasn't just a late-night segment. It was a cultural audit in real time. Jimmy tried to regain footing. You say canceling culture is about fear. But aren't there some people who should lose their platforms? You know, actual racists, sexists, homophobes? Sure, Karoline said, but prove it. Don't just label it. Debate it. Win the argument. Don't silence it. So hate speech is just another opinion to you? He asked. No. But you don't fight bad ideas by banning them, she replied. You fight them with better ones. Otherwise, you're not a host, you're a censor. The band didn't play. The crew didn't move. Even Jimmy's cue card sat untouched. Okay, Jimmy said quietly, let me ask you this. What would you do if someone used their platform to promote genocide, call it out, condemn it? Debate it, Karoline said, but don't ban it, because when you give speech limits, power decides the limits. And power shifts. Easy for you to say, Jimmy replied. You've never been the target. Karoline's jaw tightened. You don't know what I've faced, Jimmy. Don't mistake being loud with being brave. Silence again. One studio camera zoomed in on Jimmy. He was sweating now. You think you're the future of politics, he said slowly, but you're just a repackaged past angry, polished and smiling. And you, Karoline said, rising to her feet, are the past, pretending it's still the future. She didn't wait for his retort. Instead, she stepped forward, addressing the audience directly. We're not enemies. We're Americans. We need debate, not deplatforming. We need disagreement, not destruction. She turned to Jimmy one last time. Disagree with me. Challenge me. But don't pretend silencing me is a virtue. It's just fear in disguise. And with that, she walked off the set. Jimmy stayed seated. The cameras kept rolling. But he had nothing left to say. The studio air remained dense, the kind of heaviness that lingers after an earthquake. Karoline Leavitt's final words reverberated through the set like an aftershock. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to clap, stand, or simply breathe again. Jimmy Kimmel slouched in his chair, staring blankly into the middle distance. He wasn't used to being speechless, not in his domain, not on his turf, but now it felt like his desk might as well have been a witness stand. Let's, cut to break, he muttered, but the producer's voice in his earpiece answered sharply, No break. The network wants you to live. He straightened up slightly, adjusted his suit, and faked a thin smile toward the camera. Well, that got intense, he quipped, hoping to reset the mood. The audience chuckled lightly, awkwardly. The usual rhythm of the show was broken, and it wasn't coming back. Backstage, Karoline walked briskly through the corridor, heels clicking like metronome beats. Her team surrounded her with quiet pride. "You sure you want to leave it like that?" her assistant asked. She glanced sideways. "I didn't come here for applause. I came here for clarity." News alerts began buzzing in the hallway. Karoline versus Kimmel live clash, shocks late night. Trending hashtags flooded social platforms. Karoline unfiltered, Kimmel showdown, cancel of cancel. Within minutes, clips hit the internet. 10-second sound bites of Karoline's callouts. Jimmy's fumbling reactions. Analysts on cable news began to speculate, was this planned? Did Karoline ambush the show? But it wasn't a strategy. It was sincere, raw, and unfiltered. And it was resonating. Meanwhile, Jimmy regrouped. He returned from the commercial with a forced laugh, launching into his next guest segment, but the spark was gone. Even the band's music sounded off-tempo. Later that night, Karoline's full segment was uploaded to her campaign's official channel, uncut, captioned, and with a title that read, "In Defense of Dissent." The comments exploded. Finally, someone who speaks without a filter. She stood up and walked away with her spine intact. "I don't even agree with her, but damn, that was guts." Jimmy's fans fired back. How dare she hijack the show? Typical right-wing tactics, play the victim. Kimmel showed restraint. She was the one who bailed. But the real impact was in the silence of the mainstream. No condemnation, no endorsements, just, watching. By morning, major outlets had released think pieces dissecting every angle. CNN, a rising star or a reckless provocateur. Fox News, Karoline Leavitt destroys late-night narrative in real time. The Atlantic, the theater of political confrontation. Kimmel released a brief statement the next day. "While I disagree with much of what Ms. Leavitt said, I welcome debate. That's what democracy is about." But he didn't invite her back. Karoline, however, had already moved on. She flew to Iowa for a town hall that drew 3 times its expected crowd. There, the first question asked was, "What made you stand up and walk away?" Her answer was simple. Because the moment you stop being heard, you don't stay seated. You stand, and if they won't let you speak, walk. The crowd erupted. The Kimmel incident became a watershed moment in Karoline's campaign. She wasn't just another talking head now. She was a symbol, not of left or right, but of resolve. And Jimmy. He began inviting only safe guests again. No surprises, no sparks, just chuckles, just comfort. But late at night, he rewatched the footage. Not the broadcast version, the raw feed, no cuts, no edits, just truth. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure who had won. The morning after the confrontation, Karoline Leavitt's name was on every screen in America. Newsrooms buzzed with urgency. Blogs, podcasts, and live streamers scrambled to dissect the moment. On Reddit, the political humor subreddit lit up with thousands of post memes of Karoline in mid-sentence, GIFs of Jimmy Kimmel's stunned expression, hot takes with titles like "Karoline did what no politician dared and Kimmel just got prime-timed." Karoline's campaign capitalized quickly, sharing a full 30-minute edit of her appearance titled "The Truth Doesn't Flinch." Within hours, it racked up millions of views. Her team released a statement, "We don't fear tough questions, but we won't be silenced by cheap applause." Meanwhile, Karoline's supporters turned her lines into rallying cries. Truth isn't hate. Listen, don't label. Debate, don't destroy. Even late-night satirical shows weighed in. Some mocked Karoline's defiance, others applauded it. But one thing was clear, she had broken through the noise. Kimmel's show ratings dipped for the next 3 nights. Audience members left comments that spoke volumes. It felt scripted after that. Jimmy lost control, and Karoline owned the moment. That was the last time this show felt real. Behind the scenes, network executives held emergency meetings. Advertisers were concerned. Sponsors asked if future guests would be pre-screened more tightly. "We want thought-provoking, not combative," said one executive, ironically unaware that those two often walked hand in hand. Karoline returned to the campaign trail emboldened. At a rally in Pennsylvania, she referenced the showdown. "The difference between entertainment and leadership is that one sells comfort, the other speaks truth. I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to fight for you." Cheers erupted, signs waved, cameras rolled. But Karoline's focus wasn't the media storm, it was the people watching it unfold. She knew that for every fan she gained, a critic would rise, and she welcomed it. Days later on a radio interview, a host asked her, Do you think confronting Kimmel helped or hurt your chances? Karoline smiled through the speaker. That depends on what you think helps. I didn't go there to win a vote. I went there to draw a line. If you believe in what I said, then maybe that line's for you too. The host paused. So no regrets. None, she said. I'd rather lose with truth than win with a script. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel's public persona began shifting. Editorial speculated whether he'd become too partisan, too combative. His usual celebrity guests canceled or rescheduled. A-list actors didn't want to walk into controversy. Behind closed doors, his writers whispered that maybe, just maybe, the Kimmel brand needed recalibration. In one segment, a week later, Jimmy tried addressing the situation with humor. In case you missed it, I got my own show. So tonight we're keeping it light, no politics, just puppies. Laughter followed, but it sounded thinner than before. That same night, Karoline was speaking in front of a veterans group in Florida. No teleprompter, no lights, just her and a fold-out chair. When someone asked about cancel culture, she replied, "It's not about being canceled, it's about who you let cancel you. If you give them that power, you are never standing on your own anyway." The crowd applauded. Journalists started drawing comparisons. Karoline wasn't just another candidate anymore, she was being framed as a cultural figure. One magazine dubbed her the right's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, while another called her the disruptor the GOP didn't see coming. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel had quietly stopped taking political guests altogether. A new policy was leaked: avoid polarizing interviews unless cleared by the network. But the damage was already done. People had seen the curtain pulled back. The formula was broken. By the end of the week, Karoline had secured 3 major endorsements, including one from a key Midwestern senator who said, "I may not agree with her style, but damn if I don't respect her guts." The Kimmel moment became a cultural benchmark referenced in speeches, op-eds, and even classroom debates. And in quiet moments late at night, Jimmy would rewatch the clip not for rage or regret, but to understand how something so rehearsed unraveled so fast. Because it wasn't just a moment, it was a reckoning. Weeks passed, but the fire lit on that stage didn't die out, it spread. Across dinner tables, boardrooms, classrooms, and city streets, people asked the same questions. What does it mean to stand your ground? Who gets to decide which voices are silenced and which are celebrated? Karoline Leavitt, once a rising name, now sat firmly at the epicenter of a national reckoning. In a revealing interview with Time, Karoline recounted the night in Jimmy Kimmel's studio. "I knew what I was walking into. But if your principles melt in the heat, they weren't principles, they were preferences." The quote went viral, shared by everyone from political pundits to college students printing it on posters. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel's team grappled with internal fallout. Behind closed doors, the word restructure floated through tense production meetings. Writers were instructed to focus on relatable humor and less divisive segments. The show's tone shifted not because the world had changed, but because someone had challenged its mirror. Late-night hosts had long played judge and jury in the court of public opinion. But now the jury was pushing back. Commentators across the ideological spectrum weighed in. Karoline exposed something raw in our culture, said one pundit on MSNBC. She made confrontation feel like a civic duty, not a scandal. And it resonated. College campuses invited her to speak. Some were met with protests. Others sold out arenas. At the University of Michigan, Karoline told a crowd of 8,000 courage isn't about volume, it's about conviction. "I didn't raise my voice, I raised the stakes." That line landed like a punchline and a challenge. Back in LA, Jimmy Kimmel quietly canceled a week's worth of tapings. Publicly, the show cited creative recalibration. But privately, Jimmy had told a friend, "I underestimated her. I thought I was hosting a guest, I didn't realize I was debating a movement." Karoline, on the other hand, doubled down. She launched a podcast titled Line in the Sand, blending interviews, commentary, and stories from people who felt silenced. Within a month, it cracked the top 10 in national charts, and then came the book deal, titled Unfiltered: What They Don't Want You to Say. Karoline's memoir sold out pre-orders in 72 hours. The first chapter, a blow-by-blow breakdown of her 3 appearances on Jimmy Kimmel Live, with part 3 getting its own standalone analysis. America didn't see 2 people arguing, she wrote. They saw what happens when scripted reality meets unscripted resolve. At bookstores, young conservatives lined up next to moderates and curious independents. Even critics admitted Karoline had become more than a candidate. She was now a case study. And what about Jimmy? His rating slowly recovered, but the trust gap lingered. The once unshakable image of the sharp-tongued host had dulled. Comedians joked that he'd gone full Switzerland, avoiding political hot buttons in favor of celebrity trivia and pet videos. But the damage wasn't just reputational, it was generational. A new wave of young commentators emerged online, many citing Karoline as an influence. They weren't polished, they weren't perfect, but they were loud, smart, and fearless, and they weren't asking for permission. In one viral TikTok, a 19-year-old content creator summarized the moment perfectly. Karoline didn't just clap back, she rewrote the script. By the end of the year, Karoline had launched a national passé aimed at supporting candidates who don't fold under fire. Her endorsements carried weight, not because she bought loyalty, but because she'd earned it on camera in real time. Backstage at her final campaign rally of the season, someone asked, "Would you ever go back on Kimmel's show?" Karoline smirked. "Sure, I'd bring the same 3 things: facts, clarity, and 0 apologies." The crowd roared as she stepped on stage. Meanwhile, in a quiet studio on the West Coast, Jimmy Kimmel sat behind his desk staring into the lights. For a moment, he didn't crack a joke. He just looked down and whispered to himself. That night changed everything. And he was right. Because moments fade, but truth echoes forever.